One of the challenges facing those dealing with the biblical text is understanding the role of punishment within Judaism, and in particular the allowance for capital punishment for the violation of certain negative commandments. Some aspects of punishment can be aligned and are definitely reflected in the theories of punishment present in Western civilization. The role of punishment in this day and age incorporates one or more of the following aspects: one of retribution, that criminals pay for what they have done wrong; reform, rehabilitation of the individual, an attempt to change criminals so that they will not commit crimes again. There's a deterrence factor, that by punishing the criminal, it sends the message to others to not become involved with violation of the law. A fourth aspect is protecting society from criminals, either through incarceration or removing them from society through the death penalty. A fifth component is that of reparation. Society needs to make the criminal repair the damage that they have done to society. Periodically, society is exposed to acts of violence that goes well beyond the pale of acceptability. A serial killer, for example, torture and death of children, genocide, and terrorism are just a few examples. And when these events happen, the death penalty debate once again reignites as to why these individuals who perpetrate such crimes should not face the ultimate punishment, that of losing their right as a participant in society. Until relatively recent times, most countries had no compulsions about administrating harsh and cruel punishment. This is a punishment when the criminal is subjected to physical torture, in which he or she undergoes tremendous pain, and in some cases might be left to die. In ancient and medieval times, some of the most harsh and dangerous punishments were practiced, such as death by boiling, crucifixion, flaying, disembowelment, slow slicing of the skin. The whipping of children was quite common, as was the public hanging of criminals. In today's world, much of the extreme punishing ways have been abolished by governments. However, there are countries that still follow some of such practices such as flaying, beheading, stoning and hanging, blinding the criminal through administration of chemicals, eye gouging, amputation of limbs, the firing squad, caning, and the execution of choice in the United States is the electric chair. Torah law mandated 4 categories of capital punishment. One was skila, a second sreifa, the third hereg, and the fourth chenek. There were precise protocols as to how these 4 modes of execution were to be implemented. There needed to be a rigorous legal process before a death penalty can be handed down. The term mot yumat can be found well over 50 times throughout the Chumash, and when one reads the text, one might come away with the conclusion that biblical law was brutal and a way of life that certainly is out of step with the sensibilities and the value system of modern man. However, when one goes beyond the surface, one might discover that the official teachings of Judaism approve of the death penalty in principle only, because the standard of proof required for application of the death penalty is extremely stringent. And this is where, it might be argued, Judaism and its legal system parted company from other religions and their legal systems. In practice, the death penalty has been abolished by various Talmudic decisions, making the situations in which a death sentence could be passed effectively impossible and hypothetical. The Talmud Yerushalmi writes that 40 years before the Churban Bet HaMikdash, the Sanhedrin effectively abolished capital punishment, making it a hypothetical upper limit that points to the severity of punishment, but left to God alone to use, not to fallible humans. In other words, the mot yumat points to the severity of the violation. Murder, incest, idolatry are more serious violations when compared to, for example, the consumption of non-kosher food, the wearing of shatnez, and so on and so forth. The Jewish understanding of the biblical law is not based on a literal reading of the Bible, but rather through the lens of Torah Shebaal Peh. These oral laws were first recorded in the Mishnah and later on in the Talmud, and hence rabbinic tradition implements a detailed system of checks and balances to prevent the execution of an innocent person. These rules are so restrictive as to effectively legislate the penalty out of existence. So despite the 50 or so modumats, it was rare for the death penalty to be applied in the real world situation. None of this appears from a raw reading of the biblical text. It was left to the Torah Shebaal Peh to fill in the details. The Torah Shebaal Peh made it clear that the death penalty was used only rarely. A Mishnah in Makot attributed to various Tanaim pre-Churban Bet HaMikdash that a Sanhedrin that puts a man to death once in 7 years is called a destructive court of law. Rabbi Elazar ben Azari goes one step further and says not once in 7 years but once in 70 years. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon maintain that had they been in the Sanhedrin, they would have made sure that nobody would ever be put to death. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel maintains, rightfully so, that the absolute abolition of the death penalty is a double-edged sword and might impact upon the safety of the community at large. With this overview of capital punishment within the Jewish tradition, we will now turn to the commentary of Rashi to Yehuda's demand upon hearing that his daughter-in-law was pregnant, that Hotziyuha, let her be taken out with Tesaref and have her executed by fire.